Hi, everybody. I love AI policy because it's the only discipline where in the same conversation you're talking about Jane Jacobs and Eric Schmidt all in the same conversation. It's the only conversation where we can have deep discussions about multiple disciplines with equal urgency. I'm really honored to be part of that conversation. I'm honored to be here with Governor Dukakis. I was the student who in Los Angeles many years ago had the opportunity to connect with him, and it was very inspiring then, and it's inspiring now to be in the room with you and to be here with Dr. Alondra Nelson, to whom I had the privilege at the White House of serving as an advisor, but who is an extraordinary mentor to me and to so many other people who work on these and other issues. One of the best things about working at the White House is that you sort of hear from everyone. Everyone comes through at one point or another. I had the opportunity to work at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and then for about a year as a policy advisor to Vice President Harris, mostly working on issues of AI and these technology governance questions. And so for the last number of years, I've had the opportunity to sit at the table with not just fellow policymakers, but also people in Silicon Valley who are developing these technologies and deploying them, people in academia who are evaluating them, some of whom are in the room, and also people in civil society who harbor some fairly profound concerns about how these AI systems are being used. And what I've noticed in those overlapping, intersecting spaces is that when we talk about AI and democracy, the same core concerns seem to rise to the surface. Deepfake images in campaign ads, voice cloning, robocalls, election mis and disinformation. These threats are real, and they are substantial, and they are deserving of our urgent intervention. And yet, they are fundamentally downstream issues. They are consequences of a system and a society that has failed thus far to adequately grapple with earlier, more foundational questions about how we believe AI should be governed. So there is another class of risks posed by AI to democracy, many of which have risen up in this conversation today that I want to discuss. And I should just say, for the technologists in the room, I'm not one of them, that I'm going to use a lot of terms interchangeably. And please forgive me for saying things like algorithmic tools and AI and automated systems. I mean data-driven technologies that mediate important decisions in our life. First step, I think, in making sure AI supports and does not undermine democracy is to understand AI systems as we do any other form of power in a free society. To conceive of this technology as we do wealth or political influence or media influence or legal authority, which is to stipulate that like any other form of power, AI should not be hoarded, but wielded democratically. It should not be used at a whim, but after deliberate decision-making, and it shouldn't advance the interests of only a select few, but priorities forged by consensus and in the best interests of people. That's how I posit we should think about power, and that's how I posit we should think about AI. So it's in that context of understanding AI as power that I believe we should evaluate AI's impact on our democracy and determine where we need to intervene. A physician diagnoses illness by first establishing the range of normal, and if a patient presents with symptoms, of course, outside of that range, then the patient is sick. So one measure of diagnosing the health of our democracy is considering how close we are to that AI power premise. We know, of course, that our democracy is presenting far outside the range of normal, and that AI tools often are not helping. It should not be normal in a healthy democracy for Black Americans to be arrested and jailed after they are misidentified by facial recognition tools, but it's happening in Michigan and New Jersey and Georgia. It should not be normal in a healthy democracy for local governments to use chatbots, which tell local landlords that they can discriminate against tenants who are trying to pay rent through housing vouchers. But that's happening right now, as of last week, in New York City. It should not be normal in a democracy for us to see almost instantaneous corporate consolidation in the very first months after a new powerful technology emerges onto the consumer market. And it shouldn't be normal to be able to deploy powerful AI technologies to surveil warehouse and hotel workers, to cut their pay, or to fire them, all without a human being ever being involved in the decision. None of that should be normal in a democracy. All of it is corrosive. It's happening to our communities, often without our knowledge, often without our consent. So the democracy is sick. AI is not the root cause of that illness, but we need to be forthright that these technologies often, at this point, are making things worse. So I'd like to offer briefly 3 ideas. I like the idea of provocations. That's a good way of framing this, for where we could train our focus to get us closer to that power premise, for how this power should be wielded in our society to preserve our democracy. The first is that we have to focus on AI's immediate discriminatory harms, the ways that AI can threaten our civil rights. There's been some debate over the last couple of years about whether it's worth investing in mitigations against AI systems that are trained or deployed in discriminatory ways. The argument suggests that there are bigger, longer-term problems like AI's threats to the cyber infrastructure or robots becoming self-aware. I find this debate troubling, because algorithmic discrimination undermines multiracial democracy because it breaks that promise of citizenship that Dr. Nelson talked about, that if you participate, you will be represented well, you will be treated well, safe, secure, prosperous. So fair treatment by AI cannot be considered a luxury. Any tool that undermines a person's rights or access to critical services is a threat to democracy, as Vice President Harris, my former boss, said in London last year, an existential threat to democracy. So in practice, this means we need to understand that AI's risks to civil and human rights are measurable, and then we need to invest proactively in tools that can do that measuring. And if systems don't pass those tests, or companies and governments don't use these mitigations, these AI tools should stay on the shelf, period. That is largely where the US government is heading with the most recent OMB memo that Dr. Nelson spoke about. And these systems certainly should not be baked into a bunch of other applications like asbestos that's going to come up later and we're going to realize is toxic. These are questions, obviously, that now lie squarely at the foot of Congress in this democracy. We need to consider a new liability regime, a private right of action for ordinary people. We need to make explicit, as several people have said, that the civil rights that have been hard-won over time continue to apply as AI tools are being used to make decisions. The second area we need to address is the gulf between the priorities and incentives of ordinary people and the priorities and incentives of companies building and using these AI systems. That gulf is quickly growing. Last fall, 2 separate events happened in the world of AI, but I think we should see them as connected. First, the venture capital firm Sequoia announced quietly that it would stop investing in new large language models. And since around 2021, that firm had poured millions into OpenAI, and by the end of last year, they had decided that they were good. I would posit that a capital market that has unilaterally decided it's done investing in the most powerful technology of our time is not a good sign for democracy or competition. And around that same time, as Sequoia's announcement, the Sam Altman OpenAI drama that we all followed, and if we didn't, God bless you, was unfolding, and we heard all this discussion about how to structure a corporation so that it can do well and do good. This is also a bit of a sleight of hand. It muddles intentions and incentives, and it's a recipe for confusion, and confusion does not favor ordinary people. In our economic system, the bottom line, as we know, will beat out the public interest. That's okay. That's how our system works. That's what we've decided on as a society. There's nothing inherently evil about that. But if we're going to establish effective checks and balances on AI, we need to be really clear that a company, like every company, exists first to serve a profit motive and go from there. This is a question of aligned incentives as much as it is a question of accountability. The people building and selling these AI tools, as we've discussed today, have made a bold, bold, bold claim, which is that AI will eventually be able to solve problems humanity has never been able to solve before in science and in medicine and in engineering and in human productivity. I hope they're right. The time-honored tradition of Silicon Valley wonderkins writing checks they can't cash should give us some pause. But if they are right about the unrealized potential of AI, then we need to incentivize a lot more competition and find ways to get these systems solving problems that are important to the public. If they are right, then we need to have a conversation about getting decision-making about these systems from capital allotment to R&D to deployment into the hands, or at least shared by the hands, of ordinary people, people who are perhaps less concerned with everlasting life and more concerned with improving conditions in this life. People less worried about colonizing the moon and more concerned with using these powerful tools for interests without an immediate commercial upside, like climate mitigation, earthquake prediction, etc. Certainly that means making sure we have an empowered, well-staffed, independent enforcement agencies. We've heard about some of them. But it also means building out public resources to do some of this work. There are some promising initiatives already happening here. The National AI Research Resource, terrible name, great idea, is an idea that would scale up access to research and compute and data infrastructure for folks across society. That needs more money and attention, and we should also keep empowering our public engines of innovation, like our national labs, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, to dramatically scale up their use of AI in responsible sandboxes. The final area I'd offer is to begin to really view tech and AI issues as part of a broader political movement for social progress. Maria Cantwell, the senator, the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, where some of this is playing out, who began her career as a tech executive in Seattle, spoke in an interview with Kara Swisher last week about what she thinks can influence corporate tech interests to take precautions. She said, only bright lines where you say you can't do this or the company will be sued is what is going to get the general counsel and the CEO and the CFO and everybody on the same page. I think that's probably right. And yet, as we speak, these AI companies, and I know this from my time in government, are scaling up their public affairs teams, their government affairs teams. They're building out sophisticated lobbying efforts, in some cases seeking to prevent exactly these kinds of bright lines. It would be a mistake to stake a political strategy on the hope that industry will voluntarily step up and do the right thing. De facto self-regulation, sweeping legal immunity has failed us up until this point. It allowed tech interests of the 21st century to run roughshod over the interests of ordinary people. So the time is now for a dynamic, vigorous, well-organized political movement on tech issues and AI issues. That starts with political education, to help people see themselves in these issues, to help people understand that AI tools are linked directly to whether they can access quality housing or education, healthcare, economic opportunity. To move people from the abstract detachment on these issues to a really granular understanding of what these systems mean in our lives for good and for ill. My grandmother needs to know to ask when her insurance premium suddenly goes through the roof with no explanation, whether an algorithm may have accessed data she never authorized. My neighbor needs to have the critical consciousness to ask why he's being denied a loan or rejected from a job or getting targeted online in a particular way. My organizer friends certainly have to know enough about automated decision-making and AI to show up at the hearings in the state legislatures where so much of this AI battle is playing out. These steps are what the great educational thinker Paulo Freire distinguished as acts of cognition, not transferals of information in the pedagogy of the oppressed. AI is described famously as operating within a black box, but for AI to work in society, we have to take it out of that box. For democracy to survive AI, indeed for AI to work in a democracy, we need a population, an electorate, a society that is critically engaged. Let me close with something that I didn't know Dr. Nelson was going to say, but that I had planned to quote her on anyway, which is that, and something that she taught me long ago, which is that there is nothing fait accompli about technology's role in our society. We are not beholden to these systems. Each of these tools is programmed and deployed by human beings. We get to decide the way this story unfolds, and that is going to require us to remember that for all the ways AI is new, it is like any power, and it will require us to insist, us in this room, to insist and to demand and to organize and to make sure it is used to keep us safe, to support our highest values, and to protect the rights of all people. Thank you.